Pushpin disclaimer: this story is a work of creative nonfiction inspired by real emotional themes. Names, locations, and certain events have been changed or dramatized to protect the privacy of individuals and to enhance the storytelling experience. This piece contains sensitive themes such as infidelity, emotional betrayal, and family conflict and is intended for mature readers. Viewer discretion is advised. The intent of the story is not to harm or defame but to reflect on complex human relationships and growth through personal adversity. I never thought I'd find love again after my first marriage fell apart. At 42, with a heart still mending, I met Daniel, a charming, collected man with a quiet strength. He was everything I thought I needed: stable, patient, and mature. After a year of dating, we got married in a small, tasteful ceremony. It felt like a fresh start. What I hadn't prepared for, though, was his 19-year-old son, Ethan. Ethan had been polite at the wedding, even giving me a brief smile when he congratulated us. But from the moment I moved into their home, the warmth faded. I tried, truly. I'd ask about his day, offer to make him dinner, try to include him in conversations. The replies were short, often monosyllabic. He wasn't rude, just distant. Cold, even. I figured he needed time. After all, his parents had divorced only 2 years ago, and now here I was, an unfamiliar presence in his space. Daniel assured me Ethan would come around, saying, "He's just introverted. He takes time with people." I wanted to believe that. But weeks turned into months, and the silence between Ethan and me stayed loud. Our home was functional but not warm. Ethan stayed in his room most of the time, headphones in, door closed. Daniel and I would eat dinner alone, and sometimes I'd hear him trying to coax Ethan out to join us. Occasionally, he would, but he'd sit quietly, scrolling through his phone, eyes barely meeting mine. Despite the cold shoulder, I didn't take it personally. I thought maybe he missed his mother. Maybe I was just a reminder that things had changed too fast. I was willing to wait. Love required patience, especially in a blended family. But things started to shift. Not with Ethan, at least not yet, but with Daniel. He became distracted, often glued to his phone. He started working late, more than usual. When I asked if something was wrong, he'd smile too easily and say, "Just tired. Long week." His affection waned, replaced by occasional absent-minded gestures, a peck on the cheek, a distant nod before bed. Something was off. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was overthinking, being too sensitive. But the more I tried to push the doubts away, the more they returned, gnawing at me. Then one afternoon, as I was folding laundry, I heard muffled voices down the hall, Ethan's and Daniel's. They were arguing, low but tense. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt the sharpness in their tones. When I walked closer, the voices stopped. A door shut. Silence. My heart skipped. Why were they arguing? About what? In that moment, I realized that maybe the quietest person in the house, Ethan, might know more than he let on. The argument I overheard between Ethan and Daniel lingered in my mind like an unfinished sentence. Something about it made me uneasy. When I asked Daniel about it later that night, he brushed it off with a wave of his hand. "Nothing serious," he said. "Just father and son stuff." But it didn't feel like nothing. From that point on, I started noticing changes, small but undeniable. Daniel was always on his phone, smiling at messages I never saw. He'd lock his screen the second I entered the room. The man who used to cuddle me during late-night movie marathons now sat at the far end of the couch, distracted and restless. I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid. We all go through phases in a marriage, right? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was unraveling. He was pulling away from me, thread by thread, and no matter how tightly I clung to those threads, they slipped through my fingers. Ethan, meanwhile, was changing too, but in a different way. He had started observing me more. I'd catch him glancing at me from across the room, his eyes lingering a little longer than usual, not with resentment or disdain, but with a strange kind of curiosity. As if he was waiting for me to figure something out. One evening, I walked into the kitchen and found him standing there, leaning against the counter with his arms folded. "You okay?" I asked, surprised to find him there without his headphones. He nodded. "Yeah. You?" I blinked. It was the first time he'd asked me that. "I'm not sure," I replied, cautiously. "Things feel different lately." He said nothing, just looked at me for a few seconds before walking away. That short exchange stayed with me. The next few days were more of the same, Daniel distant, Ethan quietly watchful. It was like they were both part of a conversation I wasn't invited to. Then, late one night, I passed by Ethan's room and heard low murmurs, his voice on the phone. I paused, unintentionally eavesdropping. What I caught was this: "She doesn't know yet. I think she's starting to suspect." My stomach dropped. Was he talking about me? I crept back to my room and lay awake beside Daniel, who was already asleep, or pretending to be. My thoughts spiraled. What didn't I know? What was Ethan referring to? Was he hiding something for his father? Or was he trying to protect me? The questions piled up with no answers in sight. For the first time, I began to feel like a stranger in my own home, caught between two men who each seemed to be guarding their own truths. And the cracks in the picture-perfect life I thought I had started to spread wider, deeper. Something was coming. And I wasn't ready for it. The days that followed were wrapped in tension so thick I could barely breathe through it. I moved through the house like a guest, not a wife. Daniel had become a shadow of the man I married, present in body, absent in spirit. Conversations were mechanical, his kisses empty, and his laughter, when it happened, was always on his phone, never with me. I kept hoping things would go back to normal. Maybe he was just stressed. Maybe Ethan's college plans were weighing on him. Maybe I was the problem. But I knew better. My instincts weren't just whispering anymore, they were screaming. Daniel's late nights increased. At first, it was work. Then it became meeting an old friend. Once, he said he was going to the gym, but returned home in cologne I didn't recognize, with a shirt freshly tucked in. He looked too put together for a treadmill session. When I asked simple questions, his answers became defensive. "Why are you interrogating me?" he snapped once, slamming his keys on the kitchen counter. "I just asked if you had dinner," I said quietly. That night, I cried alone in the bathroom, muffling the sound with a towel. Ethan had become increasingly observant. He'd make coffee for himself and silently pour me a cup too. He'd pause near the hallway if Daniel and I were speaking in hushed voices. Once, I noticed him standing at the stairs after Daniel left for one of his evening errands. We were two strangers circling the same truth, afraid to say it aloud. One evening, as I sat alone in the backyard, Ethan came out and sat down beside me. It was the first time he'd voluntarily done that. "Cold out," he said, nodding toward the sky. "Yeah." I hugged my sweater closer. But I needed the air. He didn't speak for a moment, then glanced at me and asked softly, "Do you trust him?" I looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he hesitated, as if weighing every word. "Do you think my dad's being honest with you?" His question hit me like a slap, both sudden and oddly validating. I wanted to deny it. Pretend everything was fine. Pretend I was imagining things, because admitting the truth meant accepting my marriage was breaking apart. "I don't know anymore," I whispered, staring at the garden lights. "I used to." Ethan nodded slowly. Sometimes, things aren't what they look like. Just because someone smiles at you doesn't mean they're not lying. There was something so old in his voice, like he'd been carrying this knowledge far too long for his age. Before I could ask more, he stood up and said, "Let me know if you ever want to talk." And then he went inside, leaving me with more questions than answers. But one thing was suddenly clear. I wasn't alone in my doubt anymore. It was a Thursday evening when everything changed. Daniel had left an hour earlier, claiming he was meeting an old friend for drinks. I didn't ask who. What was the point? The lies had become so casual, so routine, I'd stopped wasting energy questioning them. I sat in the living room, numb, flipping through channels without really watching anything. The sound of footsteps made me glance up. Ethan walked in, holding his phone. He looked different tonight, focused, almost resolved. "Can we talk?" he asked. I sat up straighter. Of course. He didn't sit. He stood near the coffee table and looked down at me like he was preparing for something heavy. "I need to tell you something," he said slowly. "And I've been debating it for a while. But I think you deserve to know." My heart began to pound. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I nodded anyway. He took a deep breath, then held out his phone. "I think my dad is cheating on you." I stared at the phone in his hand, afraid to take it. What do you mean?" I didn't go looking for it. But I noticed things. Late night calls. Different names saved under fake contacts. Then I saw him at a restaurant last week. He didn't see me. He was with a woman. They kissed. The blood drained from my face. He unlocked his phone and handed it to me. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the gallery. There were photos, clear, undeniable. Daniel at a dimly lit restaurant, laughing with a woman. Holding her hand. Leaning in, kissing her. Another shot of him walking her to a car and cupping her face gently before she got in. My stomach turned. I wanted to scream, cry, run, all at once. "There's more," Ethan added gently. I checked the hotel app he uses. He had a booking last weekend. Same name. Same woman. I found the receipt in the trash. I couldn't hold the tears back anymore. They spilled freely, hot and humiliating. "I'm so sorry," Ethan said quietly. "I didn't want to hurt you. I just couldn't let it go on. You didn't deserve this." I buried my face in my hands, sobbing. Ethan sat beside me, his voice calm but heavy with sincerity. "I used to think you were trying to replace my mom. That made me hate you. But I see you now. You've tried, you've really tried. And he doesn't deserve you." That broke me all over again, his unexpected honesty, his willingness to step into my pain when he didn't have to. For months, I had felt completely alone in my marriage, in this house. But in that moment, sitting next to the boy who once couldn't even look me in the eye, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Seen. And maybe, for the first time, understood. I barely slept that night. My mind was a whirlwind of memories, questions, and the images Ethan had shown me. The pain was real, deep, and raw, but beneath it was something else too. A quiet strength growing inside me. I wasn't going to let this betrayal define me. Not again. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee brewing. It was unusual. Daniel never made coffee, and I didn't expect him back until later, knowing he had probably spent the night somewhere else. I wrapped a sweater around myself and walked into the kitchen. To my surprise, Ethan was there. He looked up from the counter, slightly awkward, but there was a soft determination in his eyes. On the table, he had placed 2 plates, scrambled eggs, toast, and fruit. Beside one plate sat a folded piece of paper. "I didn't know if you'd eaten," he said, avoiding direct eye contact. "So I made something." I stood there for a second, unsure how to respond. My throat was still tight from crying, but the gesture, simple as it was, struck me harder than I expected. Thank you," I said quietly, sitting down. He slid the plate toward me and then, without a word, walked back to the hallway. I opened the folded paper, expecting a quick note or even just a scribbled "sorry." But it was more than that. It was a letter, written in neat block handwriting. I don't know how to say this out loud, so I'm writing it down. "You didn't deserve what my dad did. I used to think you were trying to take my mom's place, and I hated you for it. But I was wrong. You're kind. You tried to make this home feel like something real, even when we didn't let you in. I've been watching how much you've been hurting and hiding it. And I don't think that's fair. You deserve someone who's honest, who sees you, who respects you. You may not be my mom. But you are someone I respect now. And if you need anything, I've got your back. I read it 3 times, each time with a fresh wave of tears. That letter, more than the photos or proof, shattered something in me, but not in a bad way. It shattered the isolation. The bitterness. The feeling of being unseen. Ethan, the boy who once refused to speak to me, was now the only person who saw what I was going through, and chose to stand beside me. Later that day, he drove me to the grocery store, helped carry the bags, and even asked about my favorite kind of tea. Something had shifted between us. I had lost something in Daniel, but I had gained something entirely unexpected in Ethan. A bond that wasn't forced. A connection that grew not out of blood, but honesty and shared pain. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like just someone's second wife. I felt like I mattered. Daniel came home late the next evening. He walked in like nothing had happened, set his keys down, loosened his tie, and gave me the same tired smile he'd been using for weeks. But something was different now. I wasn't scared of the truth anymore. I wasn't doubting myself. And I wasn't alone. Ethan was already sitting at the dining table. When Daniel walked in, he glanced at him, then at me, as if silently asking, "Are you ready?" I nodded. Daniel looked around, sensing the tension in the room. "Everything okay?" "No," I said, standing. "We need to talk." He gave a short laugh, rubbing his neck. "Now?" "I've had a long day." "You've had a long string of lies," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. "And I'm done pretending not to notice." Daniel froze. "What are you talking about?" "I know," I said. "About her. The dinners. The hotel. I've seen the pictures." His face shifted instantly, eyes wide, jaw tight. But instead of guilt, he went straight to defense. "You went through my phone?" "I didn't have to," I said. "Ethan told me." Daniel turned sharply toward Ethan. "You what?" Ethan stood up slowly. He wasn't afraid. "I told her the truth. Because she deserves it." "You little," Daniel began, voice rising, but Ethan cut him off. "No. You don't get to do that. You don't get to cheat and lie and then act like we're the ones who betrayed you." I was stunned, not just by Ethan's bravery, but by the fury and disappointment in his voice. This wasn't just about me. This was about a son seeing his father for who he really was. Daniel looked between us, his face contorting with frustration. "You don't understand. Our marriage hasn't been working. She's cold. Distant. I needed something more." I felt the sting of his words, but I didn't let them break me. Not this time. "I was distant because I knew something was wrong," I said, tears threatening but not falling. "I was trying to hold on to a man who had already let go." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "So what now?" "I want a divorce," I said simply. The words hung in the air like thunder after lightning, loud, final, inevitable. He scoffed. "You're really going to let him turn you against me?" "No," I said. "You did that all on your own." For a moment, Daniel looked small. Not the confident man I had married, but someone exposed, stripped of the lies he thought would protect him. Without another word, he grabbed his keys and left. The door closed behind him with a dull thud. Ethan and I stood in the silence that followed. Then he walked over and gently placed his hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. For the first time, I believed it. I had lost a marriage. But I had gained the kind of truth that sets you free. The days following Daniel's departure felt strangely silent, like the house itself was exhaling for the first time in years. His absence wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual. A heavy fog had lifted, and in its place came space. Not emptiness, just space. Space to breathe, to feel, to begin again. I expected to feel broken. Humiliated. Lost. But what surprised me most was the calm. I had clarity now. And I had Ethan. We didn't speak much at first. He gave me room, knowing I needed time. But his presence was consistent, steady. He helped with chores without being asked. He even started eating dinner at the table with me, something he hadn't done in months, maybe years. One evening, I came home from a walk to find him repainting the guest room. "What are you doing?" I asked, smiling in spite of myself. He shrugged, splattered with light gray paint. "You always said this color was depressing. Thought maybe it was time for something new." That single sentence hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't about the paint. It was about something deeper. A quiet acknowledgement that he saw me, my preferences, my emotions, my attempts to build a home that once felt so temporary to him. Later that week, I found a note on the fridge: "Made pasta. Yours is in the microwave." And yeah, I added extra garlic. "Like you like it." That's when I realized something profound. In the wreckage of my marriage, Ethan had started to show me what it meant to be chosen, not out of obligation or blood, but through kindness, effort, and presence. We started talking more, too. One night over tea, I asked him, "Why did you finally tell me?" He looked down into his mug. "Because I couldn't watch you shrink anymore. You were trying to be everything for him while he gave you nothing." I swallowed hard. "I used to think you hated me." "I did," he said honestly. "Because I blamed you for my dad leaving my mom. But that wasn't your fault. And even if it was, you never gave up on this family. You stayed." He didn't. That conversation sealed something between us. We weren't just coexisting anymore. We were rebuilding, quietly, gently, brick by brick. There were still hard days. Moments when the memory of betrayal crept back in like smoke under a door. But now, I had someone to talk to about it. Someone who'd once been just my stepson, but who now felt like something much more profound: an ally, a friend, maybe even the only real family I had left in that house. Rebuilding wasn't easy. But it was happening. Not just within the walls of the house, but within myself. And for the first time in a long time, I was starting to believe in something I thought I'd lost. Hope. Months passed. The seasons changed, and so did I. The divorce moved forward quietly. Daniel barely fought it, maybe out of guilt, or maybe because he had already moved on in every way that mattered. It didn't matter anymore. I wasn't chasing closure. I was chasing peace. What surprised me most wasn't how easily I let go of Daniel, but how naturally I began holding on to myself again. I rediscovered old hobbies: reading on the porch in the mornings, journaling, even taking a yoga class on weekends. The woman I had buried beneath years of compromise and silence was slowly, steadily rising to the surface. But it wasn't just my healing that changed the rhythm of the house. Ethan changed too. He began calling me by my name, no longer just her or a dismissive you. He shared stories about his classes, asked for advice on job applications, and occasionally would bring home pastries just because he saw them and thought I'd like one. Our relationship, once tense and strained, had transformed into something deeply rooted. Real. He was still young, still figuring himself out, but he had become thoughtful in a way that felt rare for his age. Empathetic. Protective, even. One evening, as we were watching a movie in the living room, he paused it halfway through and turned to me. "You know, I think I needed you." I looked at him, surprised. "Why do you say that?" "Because if it had just been him and me after the divorce, I don't know what kind of person I would have turned into. Angry, probably. Closed off. But you never gave up on me. Even when I didn't deserve it." Tears welled up in my eyes, the good kind, the kind that come from being truly seen. "You're a good kid, Ethan." "A really good one," I said. "And you've helped me more than you'll ever know." He nodded, and for the first time, leaned his head on my shoulder, just for a moment. But in that small gesture was the weight of everything we had been through together. Two people thrown into each other's lives by chance, finding healing in the wreckage left by someone else's choices. We weren't mother and son in the traditional sense. But we had chosen to care. To show up for each other when it mattered most. And in that choice, we found something Daniel never offered either of us: unconditional loyalty. That spring, Ethan graduated from high school. I stood in the front row, clapping the loudest, tears in my eyes. He found me after the ceremony and pulled me into a hug, tight, genuine. "You're coming to the dinner, right?" he asked. Of course, I smiled. Wouldn't miss it for the world. And I meant it. Because while my marriage had ended in betrayal, my story didn't end there. It ended in resilience. In unexpected connection. In healing. And most of all, in a quiet but powerful kind of love. The kind you never see coming. 6.